She's just a dishwasher. That's all Private Travis thought when he first saw Hertha woman with short hair, grease-stained shirt, hands covered in scars, silently pushing a food tray in the Pendleton camp kitchen. But there was something about the way she moved too steady, too precise that left him unsettled. A strange feeling crept into his mind. Why was a woman like her here? Why did her eyes, though they avoided everyone, somehow make the entire room fall silent? And then, a man in a Navy SEAL uniform walked in and saluted her first. But who was she? Think you know the people standing next to you every day? Wait until the end of the video. You might have to think again. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone joining us from all corners of the world. Fort Pendleton, California. In the bustling kitchen of the Marine Corps training camp, a middle-aged woman was inspecting newly delivered food trays. Her name was Margot Ellis, a logistics worker few knew about, and seemingly no one paid attention to. No one asked how long she had worked there, no one called her by name when entering the kitchen, and no thanks were ever offered, though she was there every day before dawn and the last to leave the room after each shift. She did her job in silence, without complaint, without boasting, and without demanding anything. It was as if her presence had become part of the atmosphere, familiar but invisible. Miss Ellis didn't talk much with others. Her voice wasn't loud or sharp, but always steady and concise. Those who worked with her in the kitchen knew she was efficient, always remembering everything precisely: food expiration dates, storage temperatures, delivery schedules. They also knew there was something about her that made her hard to approach, though no one truly understood what it was. Perhaps it was her silence. Perhaps it was her deep, unreadable eyes, or the scars running along both forearms, thin, long, rough, and old, that she never explained. Private Travis was one of the new recruits who had arrived at the camp not long ago. At 19, he carried the characteristic arrogance of young men fresh out of high school, full of dreams and convinced he knew everything. Travis talked a lot, liked to show off, and always emphasized to his friends that he was pursuing the SEAL program. He said it with all the pride in the world, as if the path to glory was already open to him simply because of his physical strength and determination. That day, while standing with a group of recruits waiting for their lunch turn, Travis's eyes drifted to Miss Ellis. It wasn't her appearance too plain and quiet amid the crowd in training uniforms that caught his attention, but the scars on her hands. Under her tanned skin and lean muscles, the scars stood out, unhidden, as if they weren't worth concealing. They weren't fresh, but they couldn't be ignored. They told a story, but no one asked, and Miss Ellis never shared. Travis smirked, tilting his head toward the group beside him and saying in a half-joking, half-provocative tone, "Is this what happens when you stand too close to the oven for too long?" The comment was just loud enough for a few to hear, but vague enough not to be deemed outright disrespectful. A few chuckles broke out, then quickly faded when Miss Ellis looked up. She didn't say anything. She didn't turn away. She just looked at Travis not as someone offended, not as a superior, and certainly not as someone judging him, but as if she saw right through him. Her gaze carried no anger, nor did it hold pity. It was like a mirror, reflecting back exactly what Travis had just shown. And in that moment, Travis felt himself shrink a little. He didn't know why, and he wasn't mature enough to realize that her silence was heavier than any reprimand. But his body knew. His hand stiffened on the food tray, and the usual scoffing laugh inside him died out. Miss Ellis returned to her work, as if nothing had happened. She continued inspecting the trays, jotting quick notes in neat handwriting on her clipboard. For her, it might have been just another morning among thousands of similar mornings. But for Travis, it left an uneasy quiet. He started noticing her more after that, though he wouldn't admit it. He saw how she did everything without needing to speak. He realized no one in the kitchen truly gave her orders, yet everyone seemed to follow her rhythm. He also noticed that some senior soldiers passing by would give her a slight note, a kind of respect not taught in manuals, not based on rank, and certainly not rooted in flashiness. Travis didn't understand. But he began to sense that there was something about the woman he had jokingly called the dishwasher. Something far different from what he had initially thought. And he would find out. Soon enough, but not yet. The next morning, Travis arrived at the kitchen earlier than usual. Partly because he was disciplined for his attitude during drill practice. But the other part, he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was because Miss Ellis's gaze from yesterday still haunted him, that silent look that made him feel as though he had done something profoundly wrong. The kitchen was already busy. A group of logistics staff was moving trays onto carts. Ellis, as always, didn't stand out. Still meticulous, quiet, unnamed by others but watched by all before they worked. Travis observed her from behind the food shelves, his eyes tracing her every movement. Each time she inspected a tray, jotted a note, or adjusted the refrigerator's settings, there was something strangely professional about it. Not like someone doing a temporary job, but like someone who had once checked things far more critical than food critical, enough that a single miscalculation could cost lives. As he was trying to make sense of that feeling, the back kitchen door swung open. A burly man stepped in, his uniform unlike the standard ones. On his chest was the Navy SEAL insignia. It was Sergeant Halea, combat veteran, now serving as a flight advisor for special operations. The kitchen slowed slightly when he appeared, though no one said a word. Hale glanced quickly around the room, then stopped the moment he saw Margot. His face immediately hardened. He took a few steps forward, then, unexpectedly, stood tall, at attention, and saluted her. "Good morning, Medic Ellis," he said, his voice not loud but clear, as if addressing a formal assembly. Margot tilted her head slightly in response, her expression unchanged. The entire kitchen fell silent. Every ongoing task paused for a moment, not because of the loud greeting, but because no one in the camp had ever seen a SEAL salute, a logistics worker. Never. Travis looked around, noticing a few other bewildered glances mirroring his own. He stepped closer, curiosity rising, mixed with an unnameable feeling. Hale turned to the young soldiers, his eyes scanning each one as if assessing them. "Last week," he said, "during an intensive training session at the Virginia headquarters, her name came up." He paused. Everyone held their breath. "Margot Ellis," Hale continued, "is one of only 3 women in U.S. military history to receive the Medal of Honor." No one spoke. "We call her Medic because, during the Kunduz operation, she saved an entire recon team with nothing but her first aid skills, composure, and an empty M4 rifle. Her story isn't in textbooks. But for many of us, she's the sole reason we're still standing today." Travis stood frozen. Hale didn't elaborate or recount details. He simply bowed his head to Margot once more, then left the kitchen as if he had come only to do one thing: remind everyone who she was. When the door closed, the kitchen remained still. Not a word was spoken for nearly a minute. Margot continued her work as if nothing had happened. She didn't change her expression or say anything to anyone. She just bent down to inspect a batch of cracked eggs, jotting a note with calm indifference. But Travis was no longer the same. He swallowed hard, standing silently, his throat dry. Everything he had thought about her assumed was lowly. Ordinary had just shattered like a piece of glass hitting a stone floor. A Medal of Honor. A symbol not worn on her uniform. A name that had saved lives now quietly serving trays of food to young soldiers. Travis didn't know what to do, but in his heart, one thing had undeniably changed. From that day on, Travis was no longer himself. It wasn't a sudden change, but his easy laughter grew quieter. His loud, joking remarks dwindled. He began to observe silently. And the person he observed was Margot Ellis. She didn't know her, perhaps she knew, but didn't care. She continued wiping down counters, checking inventory, marking stock as always. Tasks no one bothered to list in training records. But for her, every small job carried its own standard. There was something in her rhythm of work, a steadiness that wasn't lifeless, a quietness not born of exhaustion but of having transcended it all that Travis couldn't look away from. And as the days passed, his curiosity grew into a need to know. At first, it was vague questions through friends in the kitchen. Then, he borrowed a library computer, searching fragmented terms. Ellis plus Medal of Honor plus Afghanistan. He didn't expect much, but after a few clicks, an article appeared, not a front-page tabloid, but an evening news broadcast from a military channel, archived in a flat video with shaky camera work and dry narration. Yet its content sent chills down Travis's spine. Operation Taghar, Eastern Afghanistan border, 2008. A 15-man patrol was ambushed on a mountaintop in bad weather, with poor visibility. Communications were cut off. No reinforcements. An IED detonated early, killing 3 and exposing the team's position. Reports said most soldiers were wounded or pinned down behind a rocky ridge. The person mentioned Sergeant Margot Ellis was the tactical medic at the time. She had no combat role, no command. But after the squad leader was shot and contact was lost, it was Ellis who took the initiative alone, crossing open ground, firing continuously to create a diversion, scattering the enemy's fire. According to the sole witness, Ellis crawled through an exposed area, dragging 2 unconscious teammates out of the line of fire, carrying one on her left shoulder, pulling the other with her right arm while still using her foot to steady her rifle stock to aim at the enemy. When reinforcements arrived after nearly 4 hours, they found Ellis unconscious, exhausted, bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds to her side and forearms. But both wounded men she dragged back survived. One later recounted, "I woke up to her whispering first. Aid commands, her eyes locked on the scope. I thought I was dead until I saw her eyes so alive, so alert, and so cold." Travis read that part twice. He couldn't fathom that the woman hunched over frozen meat bins every morning had been at the center of such a feat. No fanfare, no trumpets, no large printed photos in the press. No one told him. Just a piece of archived data, and then gone. He wondered why. Why would someone like her choose to return to logistics? Why not stay with the rank, the medal, the glory? But a part of him already knew the answer, or at least was beginning to feel it. Travis closed the laptop, quietly leaving the library. The next day, as he passed through the kitchen, Miss Ellis was mopping water off the floor with an old broom. He stood watching for a few seconds, saying nothing, then slowly walked to the distribution table. He worked, as she did, no greeting, no apology. But his gaze, when it met hers, was different. Margot looked up, glancing at him briefly. Just a look. But this time, she didn't look through Travis anymore, and for the first time he felt she truly saw him. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then keep listening to the story. There are still surprising twists ahead. Comment 1 if you're loving the story, so we know you're still with us. When she returned to the States, Margot Ellis was no longer a faceless name on the logistics roster. Military media wrote about her with reverent tones. For a few weeks, her name appeared in internal Department of Defense bulletins, and a short clip from the Medal of Honor ceremony was replayed multiple times in training centers. The woman with her short-cropped hair and eyes that never strayed from the front, Lynn suddenly became an icon of courage. They called her the Quiet One of Kunduz. And then, just as the spotlight shone brightest, she abruptly submitted a request to withdraw from the Special Forces, declining all invitations to speak, refusing positions as a trainer, advisor, or tactical coordinator. She chose to return to logistics, a place with no gunfire, no titles, and where no one would recognize her without a uniform adorned with medals. That decision baffled many. Some criticized her, saying she was wasting her influence. Others speculated she suffered from post-traumatic stress after the operation. But no one asked her, because, as always, she said nothing. And because she didn't speak, they guessed. Travis no longer guessed, he just wanted to understand. One afternoon, after finishing kitchen duties, he saw Miss Ellis reorganizing the cold storage. No one else was around. The freezers hummed steadily, like a heartbeat in a space no one cared about. He stood at the doorway for a few seconds. Cold air swirled around his ankles. Then he stepped forward, speaking softly. "Ma'am." Margot turned her head. Her eyes were bright but not sharp, waiting but not pressing. I want to apologize," Travis said, his voice trembling slightly. "Back then, I said things about you I didn't know anything." A pause. Margot didn't nod, nor did she frown. She just looked at him, for a long time, as if weighing his words not with her ears but with her heart. "Knowing is a long journey, Private," she said, so softly it could have been the hum of the freezer. "And not everyone makes it to the end." Travis didn't know what else to say. He just nodded. Margot closed the freezer door, checklist in hand, and walked past him as if the conversation was over. But at the threshold, she paused briefly. She didn't turn around. "You know," she said, "I used to think courage was standing in front of a gun without flinching. Now I think, maybe courage is also daring to walk away from applause you don't need." Then she walked away. Travis stood rooted to the spot, feeling as though he had just heard something greater than a lecture on military ethics. In the weeks that followed, Travis found himself adjusting without trying. He no longer shouted on the training field to prove himself. He stopped comparing himself to others. He began watching Margot more closely, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of a desire to understand a different kind of soldier, one who didn't need to be named to know their worth. He recalled what Hale had said, that Margot was the reason many were still standing today. Yet she chose to stand on the sidelines, not out of weakness, but because she felt it was enough. And that made Travis start thinking differently about himself. From that day forward, Travis changed not in a dramatic, movie-like surge of transformation, but in a quiet, gradual, yet certain shift. He started arriving earlier than the others, not to impress, but to learn. He silently observed how Margot worked not to mimic, but to understand why the small things she did seemed so right. At first, it was the way she held meat trays steady when transferring them to the freezer. Then, it was how she checked temperatures without glancing at the thermometer just by touching the steel surface. And then, the way she logged, sorted, and organized supplies, so that when hundreds of soldiers lined up for meals, no one went without, and no action was wasted. Details like these, Travis had never noticed before. But now, they became things he wanted to remember, like survival tactics no military manual ever taught. He stopped speaking loudly. He no longer strode quickly as if to outpace everyone else. Instead, he learned to step back when needed, to nod instead of argue, to act before being told. And when he saw someone make a mistake, he didn't raise his voice, he showed them how. Once, while preparing breakfast trays for the instructors, Travis noticed a new recruit placing a tray of bread on the rack before it had fully cooled. The young soldier laughed it off, saying, "It's probably fine." Travis didn't shout. He quietly lifted the tray off, setting it back on the cooling table. When the other soldier asked, surprised, "What's that for?" Travis replied briefly, "If Margot saw that, she wouldn't stay quiet. And if she doesn't stay quiet, it means it's important." No one argued. Gradually, no one mocked Margot anymore. No one called her the dishwasher, the freezer, grandma, or any of the nicknames that had echoed in the early days. And Travis, who had once started those remarks, was now the first to shut them down if anyone slipped. One morning, while wiping down dining tables, Margot stood beside Travis, holding a spray bottle and a cloth. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke, not turning to him, not stopping her work, just as if addressing the empty space ahead. "My grandfather used to say, 'No job is small, only people fail to see its value.'" Travis paused for a beat, then nodded. For the first time, he felt the truth in such a simple statement. He had once thought being a soldier meant shooting well, running fast, or clearing obstacles efficiently. He had believed that without heroic deeds, he was just ordinary. But now, standing beside a woman who had once carried 2 teammates under gunfire without anyone knowing her name, and who chose to wash trays instead of teaching at a military academy, understood that greatness didn't need a spotlight. It needed persistence and character. Another day, while preparing for the evening distribution when everyone else had gone to rest, Travis and Margot were the only ones left. In the cold storage, where touching the steel trays stung the skin, Margot suddenly asked, "You planning to pursue the SEAL program?" Travis was caught off guard. He didn't think she paid enough attention to know that. "Yes," he replied. "At least I did before." "And now?" she asked, still stacking frozen meat in the lower compartment. "Now I want to be worthy first." Margot didn't say anything, but he caught a fleeting hint of approval in the way she nodded slightly. It wasn't public recognition, but for Travis, it was one of the quietest yet clearest signs that he was on the right path. Not to become a hero, but to learn how to be a soldier. On the final day of training camp, the atmosphere was markedly different. The sky was brighter, the parade ground meticulously cleaned, the national flag flying taut in the sea breeze. Over 400 recruits were about to complete their training course. Everyone stood tall, the sweat and dirt of the past months now only clinging to their boots, their eyes brimming with hope. Travis stood in formation, shoulders square, his gaze no longer impulsive as it had been on the first day. What he carried now wasn't pride, but something deeper, awareness, of others, and of himself. The ceremony began like any formal military review. The training commander's speech, the military band striking up, the sound of boots marching in unison on the concrete. Then came the awarding of honor certificates for outstanding recruits. Travis's name wasn't called for this distinction, but he wasn't disappointed. He only watched silently and thought to himself that perhaps the most valuable thing he had gained throughout this time wasn't a certificate. It was a look. Just when it seemed the ceremony was drawing to a close, the Navy admiral attending the event stepped up to the podium. He was a figure who appeared only on special occasions, and his presence made the parade ground fall into a hushed reverence. His voice was deep, resolute. "Today is a day to honor the recruits who have completed their training with distinction. But before we conclude, I request the entire camp to stand at attention." Everyone adjusted their posture. The air grew taut as a bowstring. he continued slowly. There is one among us who has lived on the edge of life and death not just once. A person who used their own body to pull comrades back from a place where no one thought they could survive. A person who rejected all the spotlight of glory to continue serving quietly, as part of logistics, as part of the foundation. Travis felt his heart pound. I want you, the future soldiers of the United States Navy, to remember this. Courage doesn't always come with the sound of gunfire. Sometimes it's shown in washing trays without praise, in eyes that don't look away when they see wrong, and in a presence strong enough to change others without a single word. He turned toward the kitchen building. Today, we officially honor Miss Margot Ellis, recipient of the Distinguished Service Citation for her silent sacrifice and loyalty that transcends all ranks. The entire parade ground fell silent as a grave. Margot stepped forward, her stride calm, her logistics uniform neatly pressed, bearing no medals. Only her rolled-up sleeves revealed the old scars that, in the morning sunlight, seemed to glow like an invisible badge of honor. Travis stood at attention, his hands clenched, lips pressed tight to hold back a choked breath. Margot ascended the podium, accepting the commendation plaque with both hands, bowing her head. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions, over all those years, had already spoken. The ceremony ended. The crowd began to disperse, lively chatter resuming. But Travis remained rooted. He watched her walk slowly toward the sidelines, no one crowding around her, no one asking for photos, and as if driven by something within, he hurried toward her. Miss Ellis, his voice was soft, but enough for her to pause. She turned, her eyes unsurprised, as if she had been expecting this for a long time. I'm sorry, Travis said, and this time it wasn't out of guilt, but because he knew he had once failed to see what was worth seeing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, as if by habit, she raised her hand, placing it lightly on his shoulder, as she had done for so many young soldiers years ago. Now you know, she said. Now live like it. Travis didn't respond. He only nodded. She walked away. He stood there, watching her small but steadfast figure disappear around the corner of the barracks. Her scars, the things she didn't say, the truths she didn't boast about now, they were something he would carry with him. Not to tell, but to live like it. Some people enter our lives like a breeze, not loud, not demanding, but leaving behind a profound silence. Margot Ellis was such a person. She didn't live to be honored. She lived to remind us that true courage isn't found in the sound of gunfire, but in every quiet action, every choice that needs no audience. In a world that loves noise, perhaps what we need most is to learn to see the silent people around us. To understand that no job is small, only hearts large enough to do the small things with full respect. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Have you ever met someone like Miss Ellis? Someone who made you feel you needed to live differently? Please like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to join us in telling more stories about people who seem anonymous, but are truly the soul of America.